Well, you can't trust County.
Well, welcome back. Oh my God, my voice cracked. Jesus.
Well,
I'm like, should I redo that?
don't.
I
Now
won't.
you know. Now we can match my whole like January experience where I was like, yeah.
It just means I'm going through second puberty, and that's okay. That's got to be
Exactly.
fine. But welcome back, everybody, to CreepTime the podcast. We are here for a very interesting case, which I can probably guarantee you don't know very much about because there is limited information on this story. And this is another one actually that I think was suggested on our subreddit, CreepTime the podcast. Let me see if I can find the name. Reasonable B for 4893.
I'm a reasonable bee.
A reasonable bee, like a bumblebee.
Bumblebee. Oh, love it. We
Reasonable
also had.
bumblebee.
We've had a lot of bees. We had Shree the bee a long time ago.
We did. I recall
Shree the
Shree the
bee.
Bee. I do recall her. I
Yeah.
recall Autumn Baby. And of course, Kendra.
Of course. And there's somebody else we're forgetting. That wasn't the original trifecta.
Oh, like a name that we thought was funny.
Yes.
There was Ball Sweat Summer.
Well, how can we forget Ball Sweat Summer?
I've never forgotten. She is top of mind always. But thank you again to Reasonable Bee for suggesting this. This is a story that centralizes around a young woman named Karina Holmer. And I sent over some pictures to you, which I will put up on Reddit for the creepers. I'm sending you very minimal photos for this. So the one picture that you're going to see of Karina is one of like 3 in existence that I could find. It's on the bottom left. You see it?
Mm-hmm.
Karina Holmer. So if I could just deliver a top line to everybody about what we're going to get into. This is an interesting one because it's going to reference back to a learning experience I had previously on Creep Time because she was an au pair.
Oh.
Yes. So she's working as an au pair. And for anybody who is just now listening, go back and listen to a previous episode where we learned about an au pair.
The wood chipper murder, I think is what that one was.
Precisely.
Yes.
And for anyone who doesn't know what that is or was like me, it is a young person who typically goes and lives with a host family, usually in a different country, mostly America sometimes, and they will offer childcare or they'll do housework in exchange for room and board, as well as a stipend sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. So that's what Karina was doing. She was actually living in the Boston area, just outside of it, and she was experiencing the U.S. for the very first time. But on a June night in 1996, after Karina had gone out with a couple of girlfriends who were also working as au pairs, they go out for a night to the bars and the clubs in Boston, and it was supposed to be fun. Karina never returned. Something about the sequence of this night went very, very wrong, as we would learn from witnesses, and this would lead to a discovery that almost nobody in the inner circle saw coming. But before I'm going to get into all of this and reveal what it is that actually happened in this case, welcome back, everybody, to Creep Time the podcast. Yet again, we are here for you. It is Silas, it is Stu, and we have a Friday episode. So if you're brand new, please, please, please take a minute, stick around. You can subscribe, follow the show, hit the bell notification so you always get an alert whenever we drop a surprise episode, and leave us a comment on Spotify or a
Yes,
positive
please.
review if you like the show.
Yes, because now we can like them back. We can reply. Definitely leave us comments.
Don't make no promises on my behalf.
I'm not, I'm not going to say we'll get to everybody or that we have the time to go through them, but we do see them and they're great.
You said we can reply.
We can.
But again, thank you guys for stopping by. If you're going to hear this episode, this will probably come out also just before tour. So if you're still considering getting tickets to come see Creep Time live, please come out for a night of scary stories and true crime. We want to see you. We want to do a live show for you. You can go to creeptime.com and get your tickets for any of the 8 Western dates. And additionally, I would request that you guys share the show with somebody in your life. It is so helpful for getting these stories out to more people, growing the show, and bringing more attention to some of the cases of the unsolved. So whether it's a family member, a friend, a partner, a coworker, anybody you want to share it with, please consider sharing Creep Time the podcast.
Yes.
And one last tidbit here, you can now watch Creep Time the podcast. If you don't know, if you're listening on Apple or elsewhere, you can come over to Spotify, and for a limited time, you can watch these episodes ad-free, totally uninterrupted.
You can see both of us going through puberty. on
Mm,
camera.
I know. This mustache says it's happening very quickly for me.
Yeah.
It looks taped on, is the thing. It looks
I
glued
freaking
on.
love it. I don't care what anybody says. I really do, genuinely.
Do you like it with just the stash and like clean shaven like I am now, or do you like it when it's a stash accompanied with a little bit of scruff? Or should I also add a little patch down
A little soul patch, baby. I mean,
here?
listen, I'm game to see whatever you wanna bring to the table, and then I can make an executive decision, but for right now,
You're
I
like, let me
really
watch
like
it.
the
I want to
stash.
watch.
Yeah, yeah, I really like the Bella's dad of it all.
Well, thank you guys so much for stopping by. And with all that said and all that out of the way, let's dive into our story that we have here. So you're looking at Karina. How would you describe her just for any of the creepers that aren't looking at the pictures with us?
She looks relatively young. It almost looks like maybe this was the 90s, like she's wearing a
Hmm.
choker or something like that around her neck, but she looks she's got like, long blonde hair. She looks sweet. And I'd imagine she probably has that kind of demeanor if like her work is being an au pair. I don't know how
Totally.
old she is. It's kind of hard to tell, but she looks young.
She was just 20, actually. She was
20.
very
Okay.
young. She was 20
Yeah.
years old when this all went down, and it was the 90s. It was 1996 on the night that something happened out at this club.
Okay.
So you hit on all the sort of initial touchstones of Karina. I mean, this really would be her first venture out to the US for an extended period of time. And her going through the system of being an au pair was a way that she could put her skills to use of being a caretaker, trying to do housework. We would learn there were some other sinister parts of her job that were going on, and she was certainly being overworked.
Mm,
We can dive into that in a little bit, but it is important to set the stage with that being our roadmap. We have a young girl, first time in the US, and she's living with a host family. So let's actually start the story by going back to her backstory, where this all sort of kicks off and why she was actually coming to the States in the first place. So Karina is just 20 years old. The year is 1996, early on in the year, and this all starts with a lottery ticket, believe it or not. She had a lottery ticket and she scratched it off and she won 10,000 crowns or krona, which I think when I was in Prague, I'm pretty sure they were on the crown system too. I'm not sure if like they've switched over since then to like the euro, but she won 10,000 crowns, which I think back in the 90s with inflation and like a US conversion would have been something like close to like $2,000, maybe a little bit less.
so
But
she's
like
from the Czech Republic.
no,
No, no,
actually. She is from Sweden.
from Sweden. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So there were different countries that were using the crown system, but I just remembered crowns from when I was in Prague.
Okay. Gotcha.
Czech Republic. It was a
Czech
good guess
Republic.
though.
Okay.
But yeah, she won a lottery ticket, and that's what kind of set this whole plan in motion because she had already been thinking about like, oh, I really want to like do an exchange program or be an au pair. I want to work in the States for a little bit, but you do need a little bit of initiation money to like get your plane ticket over, and then the rest is kind of taken care of for you.
Hmm.
So this was her sign. She was like, I should go. This is my reason to go.
Yeah.
So she's got a couple $1,000s. And Karina, if I could give you a little bit more of her backstory, actually, since I did mention she was in Sweden, I should touch on that a little bit further. She was from a very small town in Sweden. The best attempt that I am going to make at pronouncing the name of this town is going to happen momentarily.
Drum
But
roll.
please, if I hear even a quiver of a lip about my pronunciation, you won't see us till 2026. So the way it's written looks like Skillingard, but I wrote down the official pronunciation I looked up as Skillingaryd, Sweden.
Baby, go you. I
I
believe
know
you.
there are
That
some
sounds legit.
Swedes. There are Swedes cackling on the other end of this, and it's out of my control. I'll let it be. So if you look on a map, this is kind of in Sweden. It's like in the central western pocket of the country, but small town, somewhat rural, closer to like farm country, you could say. And even to this day, it's still quite small. I think I read something like less than 15,000 people inhabit the town today. So imagine how much smaller it was back in 96.
Wow.
So Karina has this dream. She wants to break out and she wants to make this massive move to the uncharted territory of going over to America. And this is a huge step in her life. She was later described by her family back in Sweden as very adventurous. She was very ambitious. She was smart and she was always looking to explore and have new experiences. Textbook for a 20-year-old.
Hmm.
So then where does the conversation lead us to the au pair agency? She knew of a program that would be able to connect her with a host family preferably in a big city. So she was going to settle for a suburb outside of Boston. One part of the program, of course, is that she was still going to be needing to cover her airfare to get over there, which is where the lottery ticket came into play, and it was a lucky break. And then there was one other thing I found interesting in my research. It's that typically when an au pair comes to the States, they're going to go through an agency, right? I think I probably assumed that, even though I didn't know much about an au pair. You also usually need a work visa and you need a lot of other tests, like a psych eval. They need to do background checks. You need like a training period. None of that happened. Karina actually was able to, and I think she did this intentionally, she was able to circumvent going through all the traditional like rigmarole of the agencies because she went through like a back alley type agency.
Okay.
It was a very sketchy operation that was like, yeah, we're gonna bring you over, and like obviously there's a rich family that's like sourcing through them, but they're not doing any of the proper paperwork. There's no psych evals, like
I bet
they're
it was
just kind of
cheaper for her.
and cheaper for the family.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, well, Karina didn't. I don't think Karina had to pay anything except for her air travel. So she
Oh.
was just excited to go through an agency that she didn't have to wait all too much to get connected with a family on. Because if the other agencies were like, yes, we have like a 2 month like waiting period where we have to evaluate you and then we have to train you, she cut through all that, got
Mm.
connected straight up with this family in Boston. So Karina ends up coming. On March 1996, she would board a plane that would take her straight to Boston, where she ended up getting placed with a family as their official au pair by that month. She was put into a home of the couple who went by the name of Frank Rapp, who was a well-known photographer and I believe still practices photography to this day. You will see him on that page, as well as Susan
Mhm.
Nichter, who was a painter. I don't know if she's still involved with art. This was a pretty run of the mill expectation. Their home was located in Dover, which is technically it's close to Boston. However, it is a very affluent and wealthy suburb on the
Mhm.
outskirts of Boston, right? Kind of exactly what she expected. Dover is beautiful. It is scenic, very, very wealthy. And it looked like it was going to be a fantastic situation. It was a beautiful drive coming up to the home. There are lots of quaint businesses. It looks like neighbors are out in their front lawns. Everything about it just seemed picturesque and kind of what she imagined. It was what was going to go on inside the home that we don't have full clarity on. And we would learn from some letters that she would send back that things weren't exactly warm and fuzzy in the house.
Okay.
But before I press on, how are you doing so far just with the setup of a young girl coming to the States for the first time and getting shacked up with a strange family?
Do you know, I really did before you even mentioned them, I was like, "I know this is gonna be the couple that she goes to their home," and they look maybe it's just Susan's look in this picture, but they look kinda odd. Like, I immediately started downloading, like, Gone Girl vibes, and maybe that sounds kind of,
Mhm.
silly, but that was, like, the first thing I thought is just picking up on a weird vibe from Frank and Susan.
I mean, in the context of this case, they have also kept a lot of distance from this because of what happened, and I'm keeping it kind of guarded and like close to my chest right now. But
Yeah.
I think most of the allegations and the suspicion around them come from two strange incidents that I will get into a little bit later, but mostly from those letters where she was writing back to friends and family in Sweden, mostly her friends she was being honest with. It sounded like her family. She was like, I love it here. They're so nice. Everything's great. To her friends, it was a very different story.
Okay.
She was like, there's something wrong in this house kind of vibe.
God.
So Karina's there. She's in this home in Dover, outside of Boston, and she was taking care of their two kids. She assisted with cleaning the home. So far, everything's pretty normal. Again, exactly as she expected. Everything just looks like what she thought it would be. The way that Boston actually plays into this, because yes, Dover is close, but it's still a drive away. Frank actually has a loft apartment in the city. This is the host father. So he had used this as kind of like a makeshift studio for some of his photography work, but he wasn't really using it right now. So a part of the perk they would give her, in addition to room and board, is that she would also be able to go into the city on the weekends because she had Saturdays and Sundays off, and she could stay in the loft apartment if she wanted to. This was their like perk, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
So it was cool though because she was having a good time because she had connected with other girls in the same neighborhood who were also coming through, I believe, the same agency, other au pairs. And now that they knew they had this place they could crash in Boston, they were like, let's use it every single weekend. So that's the bedrock of where all of this is starting. I'll also put this out there that I had read that she got her hands while in the States somehow on a fake ID. So even at 20, I mean, she's gonna have access to the booze and the bars
Yeah.
sort of vibe, and she's tactful enough to know, like, if I'm gonna come to the States, I'm gonna get a fake ID, and yes, I wanna explore the US, but she's coming here to party,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So where does this all go wrong, and how does it get so mysterious? Please brace, truthfully.
I know this is gonna get weird. Oh, man.
On June 21st, 1996, Karina and her friends got ready at the Loft apartment. So they're already in Boston, right? This is the one that belongs to Frank. And they were going to head into Boston to celebrate the summer solstice in the city. Summer solstice is actually something that's much more culturally connected to Sweden, I was
Mhm.
reading. So that was the reason for the celebration because they were all like, we're here, let's celebrate it together, even though nobody else is celebrating. So they ended their night on that night going to a very commonly frequented establishment called the Zanzibar, which I don't think is there anymore, but you'll see some pictures, old pictures from the inside of it. Do you see those?
Yeah, yeah, like disco ball, and it looks packed.
hmm
It's like a club.
it was a club setting. It was not like a dive bar or anything like that. Definitely more of a dance oriented club, but I
Mhm.
think the vibe of it, even in the 90s, was supposed to be a little retro for the
Okay.
90s, where they're like it's all 70s disco vibes and like
Gotcha.
60s. You could probably see that from the pictures too, because I think the black and white one actually might be one from the 90s.
Oh, yeah, and I think there's, like, multiple. I've zoomed in, there's, like, a ton of disco balls, and, like, even the
Mhm.
ceiling looks kinda reflective.
Yeah, I mean, this was a hot spot that they had gone to, I think, a number of times. So that's where they're at. And I wanna focus on this one moment because what goes down on this night in this bar or outside of it is a bit mysterious. And this is where we see some gaps in the timeline of what happened to Karina. What we know is that while in that bar, Karina was drinking very, very heavily. And it got to the point where she was nearly gonna black out, actually. And she was asked to leave the bar, which I believe she was found in the bathroom of the bar, like, on the floor, like, that level of blackout, and that's when the bar was like, "You gotta get out of here."
Damn.
So she's kicked out. Now, the reason being that I would call attention to this, the reason I think it's important is because she is separated from her friends in this moment. Disastrous.
Yeah.
She was passed out on the bathroom floor, gets woken up, gets tossed out, is kind of incoherent, and is kind of stumbling around the street, trying to keep her wits about her, trying to stay conscious. The final witness that I could dig up who saw her when she was outside of the bar said that she was drunk, but she was conscious. She was in a bit of a euphoric state and she was dancing out in public on the street. And she started dancing with a homeless man who was out there as well. And this is at around 3:20 in the morning, if I can paint this picture for you. And mind you, at this point, she is separated from her friends. They do not know where she is. So she is last seen talking with another man, I believe, while she's out there and she's in this state. And this guy was identified as Herb Witten, kind of a sleazy character from what I could piece together. Nobody else described him that way, but I'm gonna paint him as such, solely because he's a 49-year-old guy who did not live in Boston. He would come to the city on weekends and he would bring his dog with him and wait outside of clubs, usually this club, solely for the purpose of drunk girls coming out
Mhm.
and seeing the dog while they're drunk. And then that's his way in to start a conversation with them. And then he takes them back somewhere in Boston.
I think it's safe to say he's a sleaze.
Sleaze,
It's a
sleaze,
sleaze. Yeah.
nasty. But that's exactly what happened. She was seen talking with this creepy character as well, the 49-year-old. He sees a pretty young girl. And this is where the witness statements start to get a little insane, I think. At one point, because don't forget, Karina, she's not with her friend. She gets whisked away by that creepy 49-year-old. And then the club bouncers actually step in, thank God, and they get him away from her. But he had an intent where he was like basically putting his arm around her and walking her in a direction away from the club. We'll hold on to that while we investigate this. She also, at one point, according to a witness, ended up in somebody's car outside of the bar. And I wasn't exactly sure what the deal was with this. Like if somebody was trying to rescue her from the sleazy guy or sleazier guys took her away from that sleazy guy. Like something about the whole thing just feels off.
Mhm.
But in that silver car that she was in, there are two men inside, and one of them threatened the 49-year-old. And they said, "Get away from the car and get away from her, or we'll kill you." I think they said, actually, there's a direct quote here, "We'll crush your head."
Oh my god.
And she's, mind you, in like the middle seat in between two guys in that silver car.
Oh,
There is another conflicting witness statement on this, which is why the timeline was so confusing for what the hell happened outside of the club. But it claimed that Karina was actually last seen by herself. So she was let out of the car, is what this is suggesting. And she was seen on foot walking down Tremont Street, which is a direction away from the club. And she was alone at this time. But these statements would solidify some of the last known sightings of Karina. Granted, I know this is a very difficult timeline to follow, but I just want to emphasize too the time period and it being 1996 and how disastrous and dark this sort of feels that this poor girl who's solo and drunk is getting like jostled around between different
yeah.
men and groups that are trying to like take her different places or help her, whatever it may be. And she is not with her girlfriends, who,
Oh,
mind you, did not follow up to find out where she was. They went home with different guys, allegedly.
oh my god, that's
And
awful.
there are no cell phones.
Right.
We never think about that. Is I feel like, of course, everybody knows in the back of their mind. They're like, we are much safer today, a little safer with cell phones, but it is actually it has changed everything about going out in that system, like how you navigate where you're going. Because like,
Yeah.
if you're that drunk and you're in Boston, who's to say she even knows how to get back to the loft apartment, like her crash pad?
Oh, I'm sure. And how about, I mean, I don't know how good her English was, but like I'm
It wasn't
sure
bad from what I read. It was decent.
it was good. I'm sure, but even so, I'm sure they heard her accent and they knew that like maybe she didn't know where she was, or maybe she had
Mhm.
revealed to them, I'm not from here.
Reads as a tourist
Yeah,
immediately. Yeah.
yeah,
I couldn't stop thinking about that. I was like, even if she took off on her own, on foot, I couldn't imagine how you would navigate that without having to be reliant on a map system, you know?
yeah.
I'm so used to that because I can't really get anywhere without one, but
Oh, I just
also the
hate,
fact that nobody could contact her.
and I hate thinking about her being so intoxicated and like probably she's probably trying to tell herself like get it together, but there's just if she's passed out in the bathroom, I'm sure she was really, even her motor functions were probably, like, slowed down if she was
Oh,
gonna
can
react to
barely
somebody.
stand, can
Yeah.
barely
Yeah.
stand. But also, I mean, maybe, like, the euphoria of her, like, talking, like, being friendly enough to talk with, like, all strangers that approach was
Mhm.
just a part of being young and being out and not really having a dark experience
Right.
thus far. And maybe she was just trusting too many
Mhm.
people because she was intoxicated. But if this last witness statement is to be believed, I believe she was outside of the car and she was on foot walking alone. That was when she was last seen.
Okay.
Now, what we would have hoped would happen, is, of course, is that Karina is on foot and she makes her way back to the loft apartment. But as you and I both know, that did not happen. There was some other stuff that I read about here that came out, I think, much later in the investigation. It was the recovery of a number of letters, which I was talking about before. These were written to friends suggesting she was not happy in this arrangement as the au pair. She was actually planning to cut the program short, which I think says that she was very, very unhappy.
Yeah.
And she wrote something to a friend, possibly a sister. I saw some conflicting reports on this about who exactly got this note, but this is back in Sweden. And she said something very cryptic where she goes, something terrible has happened in the family. And she would tell them more once she got back home to Sweden. We would never find out what that was.
Ooh.
Sinister.
Yeah.
Odd detail, possibly very relevant to the strangeness of what happens next, possibly irrelevant. We'll unpack. But just 2 days after Karina was last seen leaving that area near the bar slash nightclub, there was a homeless man who began digging through a dumpster in the Back Bay neighborhood. While this man was sort of rifling through different bags of trash and insects, he came across a mysterious green bag. And the bag was very heavy and it looked very out of place among the others. And he was curious, so he decided to tear the bag open and peek through to find out what was inside, only to open it. And what he found was the body of Karina staring back at him.
Oh my god.
Pressed within that green bag, what immediately emerged once he tore it open was first the arm of a young woman. Now, this was shocking, and upon further inspection, police would get to the bag and they would remove it entirely. And they cut open the remainder where they found the entire, fully intact upper body only of Karina. The traumatic sight that you could imagine these officers endured was to find the remains of this 21-year-old girl who had just been seen 48 hours prior wandering the streets of Boston alone. It is a sight that many of the officers who were first on this scene said they have never once forgotten,
Oh my
even to this
god.
day. Her neck had been severely bruised and lacerated, showing what investigators believed were very clear indications of an aggressive and violent strangulation, possibly with some sort of a rope or a cord that was used around her neck. Her body, once they took it in for examination and autopsy, had been very carefully washed, very meticulously bathed. And her lower body, of course, had been cut off completely using some sort of sharp electric saw, something to that effect. And the lower half of Karina's body was not found at the scene. I have to best communicate, I think, just how shocking this maybe was for 1996 in this area. Not to say that the Boston area hasn't seen catastrophic levels of true crime or, horrible discoveries like this, but this made major waves in Boston at the time. It was one of the most chilling crimes that had been reported about in decades.
I mean, it's like Black Dahlia level, like, to go and find a torso but her head was still on the
Her head was still on, but
okay,
it's actually much closer to Black Dahlia than you might expect.
really?
Because not only was the lower half of the body severed very carefully, possibly surgically, and missing, but I believe the blood had been drained from her body.
Oh my god, what the hell?
They did not find any fingerprints on the body, of course, because the body had been washed. However, there was a partial fingerprint that was actually on the bag, and this hopefully was going to lead them in the direction of something where they could scratch the surface of like what really happened here, who took this girl, who did this to this girl. But it was going to require a lot of digging. So they wanted to know maybe the manufacturer of the trash bag. That's where they first sourced. So they were combing through like all these sales records to see like, okay, if we can get the manufacturer of the bag and we can go to them and get their sales records to see how many of these bags were sold in the Boston area or surrounding areas, maybe we might be able to piece together who bought the bag and how far in advance they bought the bag that they actually bagged her up in. And they also searched bodies of water and they were looking, you know, for all kinds of clues over like the loft department. Nothing was ever found that could lead them immediately to a suspect or even to the lower half of Karina's body. It has never been found.
Oh my god.
So, above all, of course, we have this body, and there is something else here that seems to be missing. One of the top things that I saw that unnerved me the most is that within the first 24 hours, I believe, of the discovery of the upper half of the body, this was, of course, in the news. It was listed in the news as like the murder of a mutilated Jane Doe because they hadn't even named who the girl was yet.
Mhm.
They didn't know it was Karina. That is when the host family finally gets clued in that it's their au pair. They didn't
Wow.
even know.
Oh my god.
They
Well,
saw it on the news.
that kinda says something in and of itself.
Well, maybe
I
there's a
won't jump
question or
ahead. I won't jump
maybe
ahead.
there's a question around. No, I wanna talk about it though,
Yeah.
because this is what the host family says. They were like, "We learned on the news that it was Karina because we knew it was a blonde girl who was found in the Boston area who had been out the night before." They connected the dots, but maybe they knew more than they were letting on, is my point.
Yeah. Or what I guess my point I was trying to make was, like, even if they're not involved at all, that they're just kind of aloof to her whereabouts.
Being
Like, they don't
gone for
really
48
care.
hours, yeah.
I think it's kinda crazy that they, like, I mean, that's a lot of trust in a 20-year-old that you don't know very well to go stay in your loft apartment in downtown Boston, like, going out on the weekends. I mean,
I
I don't
guess.
know.
Well, trust, like, that she's gonna be safe, you mean?
Yeah, be safe and, like, that's what I'm trying to say, I think, is, like, it just doesn't seem like they really cared. Like, they didn't think about the consequences of that. Like, I would definitely be thinking, "Oh my god, like, if we let her go and do that, we have to really hope she's, like, a responsible kid." But
Mhm.
also she's 20, like, they know she's underage,
That is a good point too. I
you
wasn't even
know?
thinking about that. I mean, maybe they were trying to play, like, the cool parents
I
card or
know, that's kinda
something,
what I was
like,
thinking.
well, we've got some darker theories here that could talk about why she had free reign of the Boston apartment,
Okay.
Frank's apartment.
Mm.
But I agree with you. I do think it is a little odd, but I also think it's, indicative of the sketchy way that they went about sourcing her. Because she was here basically on no work visa, and there was, like, really no record of her being there, and it was all kind of under the table through this
Mhm.
sketchy agency. They weren't really gonna be seen as liable, as, like, the
That's
people to have protected her as her host family.
huh. See that, like, as an investigator, I would look at it on the other side and be like, "Okay, these people are already shady that they did
Mhm.
this,
That
like,
they went through this. I
not
mean,
by the
maybe
books." Yeah.
I can give them the benefit of the doubt and say, like, maybe they didn't know that those things were, like, normal,
Yeah.
like, a screening was normal. I don't know if they had au pairs before, but none of that happened. I mean, she was basically, for lack of a better phrase, she was basically trafficked here, to be
Yeah.
honest,
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
there's no record or safety net in place to document that she was in the States.
Mm.
So that's what we've got. The family just finds out it is their au pair who was found severed and dumped in a dumpster in Boston. So, of course, officers are sent to the home in Dover. This is what you need to strap in for.
Okay.
When they arrive on the street and they're getting up to the home because they immediately have to question the family because the family had just called into 911, officers get to the house. Their trash barrel is on fire.
The
The
Frank
host
and
family.
Susan?
The host family. They're
Oh,
burning
hell
something.
no.
They're burning something in their trash barrel. They didn't admit to that, but the trash barrel was mysteriously found engulfed in flames by the time cops came.
Yeah, something a really affluent, Dover family is just gonna be doing on a random Tuesday night.
Well, I mean, they never even took credit for it because they were just like, "We don't know how that happened. Maybe we threw something in there or something." And
Yeah.
after I believe the fire was put out, police said they kind of, were, looking through things. They didn't find anything of note, but who's to say it wasn't like a letter or something, or like something
Mhm.
found in Karina's room that they were like, "We've got to dump this and get rid of it." That could be
Interesting.
ash in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Very suspicious. I just wanted to
Mhm.
call that out.
Yeah.
Suspicious and strange sight. And then suddenly there are, of course, missing remains. So I think initially when cops showed up, what they had thought of, they were like, is it possible? Because they hadn't looked in the fire just yet. They were like, is it possible they are trying to burn the missing remains?
Mhm.
Immediately targeting the family. It was not that. I'll just disclose. But what is interesting about that fire is that it's never followed up on after. Like, even once, like, forensics got involved and, like, they had recovered all the ashes and everything, like, there's no further mention of it, and I just thought that was strange that it kind of, like, dropped off the cliff of the story, but
Yeah.
maybe we'll reference it towards the end. They just couldn't determine what had caused the fire or what was in there, and immediately after this, once police are like, "Why is this fire, like, in your front lawn?" and, like, "What can you tell us about Karina?" Either it was their decision or it was their attorneys. They stopped speaking with police. Immediately cut off conversation with police.
Shoot.
It could have been that they were trying to protect themselves. I do not know, but I'm just going to make mention of it. This is what happened.
Yeah. It's
But
giving, like, affluent family all of a sudden gets a good lawyer and they're like,
mhm,
"Keep your mouth closed."
it's doesn't look good though. It
Yeah.
looks like a bad sign. I raised an eyebrow to it. So there are theories around this family that part of the intention of obtaining the au pair from an undocumented agency was that because Frank was going to allegedly coax this girl into sex. This was part of his idea, right? And part of the theory around this is that the sex was happening in that lofted apartment, which is why she was given the privilege as the 20-year-old au pair to use the apartment in Boston on the weekends. That was their agreement. Now, part of the secret condition, if this theory is believed to be true, is that at a certain point, is it possible Karina was pregnant?
Oh my god. Wow. Wow. Okay.
That was well, I'm also gonna play devil's advocate with myself on that one solely because people were like, "Is it possible she was pregnant?" And that is the reason the lower half of the body was removed and has been hidden forever. I don't think that was true. One,
Yeah.
because I think if a proper autopsy was done, it would show in her bloodstream that she was pregnant. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think that you
Yeah.
necessarily need someone's womb to tell whether or not they're pregnant.
Mhm.
And I did not see that in her autopsy report. So I am going to throw that theory out. I'm just tossing it here because that's what a lot of people say.
Yeah.
But I'm also not going to rule out the possibility that Frank and Karina maybe had a silent agreement that she was trading sex for the apartment.
I mean, that was my first I think that's why I said, like, I'm getting Gone Girl vibes is because I was getting,
Mhm.
like, or maybe not Gone Girl, what's the movie I'm thinking of?
I don't know,
Um,
actually.
um, maybe it is like Girl on the Train, there's, like, a nanny in the picture and the mom, like, knows about it, knows that it's going on, the affair's happening.
There's too many
Um,
movies that start with the word girl.
I know, I
Like,
know.
it's
Remember
like
we always used to laugh
the
about
girl
that?
in the
Yeah.
window
The
across the
woman
way down the street boarding the train at 4:55. Like,
Exactly, exactly.
there's so
Yes.
many
We
movies
used to
like
laugh
that.
about that. Um, that's immediately what I thought of, though, and I actually my other first thought is I was like, "I wonder if the wife knew." I have nothing to back any of this up. I'm literally just going off
No, I
of,
mean,
like
it's
yeah,
first of all, there is nothing to back anything up here.
yeah,
Like, what because as we would learn, this case is something that will remain unsolved, so it's worthwhile talking through and exercising some of the strangeness around the family. I think if we're
mhm,
talking about theories, and I would wager that maybe the wife didn't know, or
yeah,
maybe knew to an extent that, like, maybe sex or flirting was going on. I don't know. It depends where he was on the weekends, I suppose, and, like, when
mhm,
this alleged affair would have happened.
yeah,
But it struck me as odd as well to hear that she was given free reign of an apartment in Boston as a perk, and I
and
had
also
wondered how normal or abnormal that was.
and also his studio, like, his livelihood where he, keeps very precious stuff. I mean
Well, he said he hadn't been using it for a while.
Oh,
So
okay,
so he says. That's why
okay,
he was like, "It's open if you can stay there." Because, I mean, truth be told, we could both be going up the wrong tree with this one, like
uh-huh,
barking.
yeah,
And maybe it was benign and maybe it was platonic and innocent, and he was like, "Have fun. Go to Boston, you can use the apartment." So I'll play both sides of the aisle there, but I only raise an eyebrow because they won't talk to police and because their home is found with a burning trash can.
that's so weird.
Nobody has explained that. That's crazy to me. So I guess that leaves us with a lot of different questions here. We have questions on timing, we have questions on locations, and specifically, who would have motive to do this to this girl is the
Mhm.
big one. One of the top concerns around this case is the confusing question of the exact location. Karina's body is found in a dumpster, right? And it's behind these apartments on, I think it's Boylston Street. Bostonians, correct me. Um, This wasn't exactly close to her last known whereabouts, like where she was seen walking alone, maybe. So, one is the question of transportation, how the body even got over there. And I guess when the murder and severing actually happened, because I do believe that happened indoors somewhere. And this also presented some confusion around how somebody could have dumped this body in that location. Because if you look at a map of this place, it is very exposed, very, very open. Um, And yet there are no witnesses who saw this person dumping this very large, heavy green bag with an upper torso in it in the dumpster. Nobody.
And it's like an apartment building, it sounds or like
It's
residence.
behind an apartment building.
Okay. Yeah,
But
that's
the
very
behind
odd.
of it is completely open to not only the street, but I believe a part of the freeway.
Okay.
And it's just a heavily trafficked area. So this was very confusing as to how nobody saw anybody dump someone, which led a lot of people to question maybe it's not necessarily about people not seeing this person, but whether or not they were looking for the right person. So, who could that be? There is some suspicion that would fall onto a local Boston police officer whose name has not been disclosed in this investigation, but it was serious enough that he was brought in for questioning. There is evidence that is found to suggest that Karina and this unnamed officer from the Boston PD were sleeping together. And the way that I connected that when they were pitching this theory to be like, is it possible somebody could have dumped the body, but have done so kind of in an invisible way? The person that you kind of scurry away from who's walking the street in Boston is a cop, maybe.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
was wondering, could a cop do that and nobody's going to take a second glance because they're not assuming the cop's doing anything bad? Not sure if that's the direction it was going, but I will just say this was a compelling enough theory that they did bring in this officer for extensive questioning. I don't know if he was able to provide an alibi. I think maybe he said something, but I don't know how well it held up, but he just stayed pretty firm from what I read about consistent denial that, like, he had nothing to do with this. Maybe strings got pulled behind the scenes. We
Mhm.
may never know because a lot of it's been concealed. But there are many questions as to whether or not this officer would have had motive and the means to dump the body after he severed it himself. And if so, why? Why sever the body? Why drain the blood?
Mhm.
Could it
Do
have been a homeless person? That's
Mm.
another question that people had.
Sorry to interrupt. Do
Yeah,
you think
please.
that from what you saw, was the idea that she and this officer, it happened all in this one night? Or do you think it was like she had been going into the city in like routinely, like going out on the weekends and like
Oh,
maybe
like,
had
had
met
she been
him?
dating him for a while?
Yeah, yeah.
It's suggestive that they had been dating for a
They had been
while.
dating. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It was suggestive this was not opportunistic in that way.
Mhm.
Um, she and this person knew each other,
Okay, okay. Got it.
and I definitely do think that that did happen, by the way. I do think they were sleeping
They
together,
were
her and
yeah.
this officer, because they it was credible enough, again, that they wanted to question him. They just believed that, again, even after that, he had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
So if we're ruling him out, or at least putting him in one block, and we don't know which way to go when it comes to the Frank theory and whether or not he would be capable of doing this, why he would do this, I guess there are other avenues that we could explore here, that would fall under the umbrella, but they start to feel a little more fantastical, I guess you could say. So much so because there's really no motive that we're going off of, right? So we're just starting to fill in the blanks. Maybe if we could slide back to the host family. Uh, there is another theory here that doesn't have to do with pregnancy or a sex cover up. It could have been that Karina had seen something go down in that house that was maybe illegal, maybe something really bad,
Yeah.
possibly him harming his children, maybe the father. I'm just trying to think about the note that she sent home to her friends where she said something terrible has happened. I'll tell you
Yeah.
more when I get there. And then she wants to cut off her trip immediately.
Yeah. I feel like it would have had to have been something that happened directly to her.
It's possible.
Um,
Either or it could be true.
yeah.
But
Or
I'm just
yeah.
wondering if, like, I'm wondering if it had to do with either scenario where she is a loose end who could talk and sort of like ruin him, if
Mhm.
we're looking at Frank with like a suspicious eye.
Yeah. I guess the reason why I was saying I feel like it happened to her is because she also didn't talk. Like, she didn't say anything, which maybe there was, like, shame there.
Mhm.
Like, something had happened, and she was like, "I don't wanna, like" and she also, like, didn't say anything to her family, which might kind of maybe she just didn't wanna worry them, but, like, that
Mhm.
also kind of if some guy had, like, come on to me or something, or if I felt like I was in danger, I probably would, like, phone my family or write in the letter, "I feel unsafe. This is not a good environment for me." So it's interesting to me. I feel like I'm just downloading, but I feel like maybe
Mhm.
she had some sort of interaction with him that maybe she didn't feel like was kosher, but
I
was
definitely think
ashamed.
that happened. I mean,
Yeah.
whether or not it was something that happened directly to her or she knew about something and he confronted her about this, it seemed
Mhm.
clear that in any scenario, she saw something bad happen or experienced something terrible, but she's not calling home because it's long distance. So she is limited to mail correspondence, which does
Oh,
take a long time.
yeah.
And really, she has nobody else in the States to talk to except for maybe that officer she's sleeping with, and then these two girlfriends who are also au pairs.
Mhm.
If she's telling them about this, because don't forget, she met them just this season.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I do think that if we're talking about motive, it just seems so wildly unrealistic that somebody could have abducted her on that night in an opportunistic way and had gone to these lengths to harm and dismember her, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I the first thing I thought was the severing of someone's body. First of all, it just feels extremely over the top and personal. Like, I feel like if it was some random attack, like she had been stumbling out of the bar and this person came and got her and maybe, assaulted her or whatever, and then was like, "Oh god, I gotta get rid of this girl," or maybe like accidentally killed her or something. It
Mhm.
just seems so over the top to go and cut the entire, you know,
The whole
hack
trip
the
off.
half body off. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about the trip, but yeah,
Oh,
it is extremely insane, like, what happened to her remains, and I'm just wondering, part of me was wondering, I was like, "Is this somebody sick who wants to mutilate for the sake of mutilation, or was there a motive?" Which, again, a lot of people reference back to the pregnancy thing, but I'm ruling that out because there's nothing found in the bloodstream, unless they thought in the back of their mind she was pregnant and that was just a stupid thing they were doing because they didn't know that you could tell
uh-huh.
someone's pregnant from their blood. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, if she had told, Like, let's say it was somebody like Frank, right? And he just had no knowledge, like, no way to look up whether or not you can tell someone's pregnant, um, in death from their blood, and he assumed if you just remove their uterus and their womb,
Mhm.
you're not gonna be able to tell. Like, it could have been a mutilation that was born out of ignorance, is my guess.
Yeah, or a mutilation born out of just, d like, symbolically doing that would like,
Mhm.
they would feel some sort of satisfaction from, like, cutting her in that particular area.
What do you
Kind of
think the
like Alison
profile
Botha.
It is very much like Alice and Botha.
Yeah.
What do you think the profile would be of the person who could do this? I'm just curious, like, do you have an inkling of maybe the person who would be interested in a crime like this? And also, do you think they might have been watching her for a longer period during the night? Because I wondered that.
Like, I definitely don't think it was a homeless person because I feel like
Mhm.
they would had to have taken her somewhere in order to do this, you know, hidden away. Um, it just seems so personal again, so I kind of feel like it's somebody that did know her prior, like this officer or something, or maybe like a guy that had been maybe I'm reading into it too much, like, but it could have even been somebody throughout that night that was coming onto her, and she was like,
Mhm.
"Ooh, get away from me. Ooh, get away from me," because it just feels so like if you just wanted to kill or assault and then kill, this is a really intense way to get to finish somebody's life off. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm trying to, like, color it with more stuff that I know about this because what's interesting is that that partial fingerprint, remember I was saying that, that was found, like, on the bag, and they were like, "Yes, this is our way in," because they did
Yeah.
have a fingerprinting system and a very, like, early version of a database. There has never been a match. So whoever that was who did this has never been to prison. They have no record,
Oh
which is really fascinating because from the incision, the type of cut, it suggested to one examiner. There are two people who have looked at this and weighed in and with like opposing sides, I suppose. One examiner says this is enough skill. Like this incision was done with enough skill that this seems like somebody who knew what they were doing, at least maybe on a surgical level. While another pathologist who looked at some of this case in her autopsy, they said this looks like a first time kill
my.
from the just the way they discarded the body. And I think we can back that up because this is certainly a person who has no prior record. So I don't know where that kind of leaves us with this profile. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like two different statements that stand in direct contrast of one another. And what's interesting too is that this was even before or like very early on in the years of DNA. So I don't think DNA conversations about DNA when it comes to forensics were top of mind
Mhm.
for a lot of people or criminals. But this person had the foresight to wash the body and the hair.
That's so weird. I was also thinking, I don't know if they looked at this at all in the autopsy, but like same thing with was it Allison Botha? I'm forgetting who it was, but like they could tell. No, it wouldn't have been her because she survived.
Mhm.
But that the brain kind of when it's experiencing that much pain, who was that? That they could tell in the brain that she was still alive while all the torture was happening.
Oh, this was a body, the Brazil
Yeah.
body. That'll come out after
Yes.
this episode.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
It's fine.
Uh, but,
But yeah,
like,
I
I wonder if she was alive. I don't know if they could tell that.
I don't think so because of the strangulation on her neck. I think they definitively
Oh,
ruled
right.
that she was
Okay.
killed from strangulation, and
Yeah.
then the dismemberment happened after the fact. The question is still the why, I guess. And I guess even more than that, like, more than the why, it's like, where are the remains? Because they also had canines on this case, like, they used a lot of resources in Boston because this was a big headline at the time, and they have never found, ever, 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 that lower body.
That's
It's in no body of water. It's just gone.
yeah, I don't even know as an investigator where I'd begin to look. I mean, I guess body of water, but other than that, like, where do you go around Boston? Like, other apartment units and look in those dumpsters? Like, how did this
They did
person
start doing that,
they
actually.
did?
Yeah, they did started scouring so many dumpsters looking because they thought it was like, one of those types of dismemberment jobs where the body is hacked up into different pieces and then it's, like, displaced in different locations to scatter.
Yeah. I was kinda thinking, like, is this person toying with police even? Like, when you first mentioned it, I was like, "What is where is this about to take a weird turn?" Like, I
Some people thought that. They thought that people have tried to draw some parallels to some other cases. I think that happened a couple of years either after or before. I forget which direction, but those also didn't seem consistent one to one. Like I have not seen something in this time frame in this area that looks exactly like Karina's case. It seems like this person just did this exclusively to her, and
Yeah.
it was possibly their first time kill, possibly their only kill.
Do they think it was a first time kill because, like, the way she was cut up was really
No, it's the opposite. That
Oh.
was one of the examiners who said the way she was cut up looks very precise, and, like, it
Oh,
came from somebody who knew what they were doing. It was the way that I think she was discarded that they said this is indicative of a first-time kill, thinking
okay.
that, like, this placement would be sufficient to hide the
Very
body.
interesting. Well, I wonder if it was a really precise, cut and everything, if that tells us anything about the profile of the person.
Well, I mean, I think that's important to pay attention to and the washing of the body because it
Yeah, I keep
suggests
forgetting that.
a certain level of forensic knowledge, maybe.
Yeah.
Or they're just mimicking old stories from true crime lore, and maybe they are mimicking something
Mhm.
closer to the Black Dahlia.
Mhm.
Although she has no other mutilation on her body. We don't know what the lower half experienced, but she is just severed at the waist and found that way.
So
But sadly, I mean, after 1996, I don't think this investigation lasted more than a year or two, and the headlines started to die off. And it has stood kind of frozen in time as this very dark and morbid relic from that nightclub, which I do think is gone. But nobody really knows what happened to her all those years ago.
gosh. Is there any involvement with the mom, like, at all? Like, did she have any I don't know why, but I picked up on, like, immediately
The host
weird.
family mom?
Yeah, Susan. I got, like, weird vibes when I looked at her picture, so I was, like, kinda curious if she was
I'm trying to
uh
remember. I could be misremembering this, but I wanna say I read something where in one of her letters, Karina had said something back home to a friend, not to her parents, where she
Mhm.
was like, "The mom is not very nice." And I think
Mm.
she also said the mom was like I remember this now. She said, like, she was being overworked by the mom, and she said
Yeah.
that she's unhappy because there's so much work all the time.
Mm.
And I just don't think they had a good, like, warm relationship, and I don't know what that says one about the other, if there was resentment there, if maybe the mom silently knew, if
Mhm.
something might have been going on between her and Frank. I have no idea.
For some reason, it's reading to me as, like, well, I guess they must have tested his fingerprints against the fingerprint found, and it wasn't a match, but there was
Mhm,
something kind of when you mentioned that she had been dating a police officer that I started to envision, like, had she gone out, met him, they started dating, and then she would get, like, wasted, and then he'd have to go pick her up or something, or, maybe she was even getting in trouble sometimes, and he started to
mhm.
get, like, resentful of her or, like
I never read anything about how their correspondence actually worked,
Mhm.
because it must have been, like, local phone calls, I'm guessing, but on that night specifically, the only way she could get in touch with him is a payphone.
Yeah.
And I don't even know. I mean, I guess she would call his house phone. She can't call him if he's patrolling, you know?
Yeah.
So I have no idea how that plays into it, but also truthfully, I mean, his fingerprint has been tested, as has Frank's. It sounds like everybody's fingerprint has been tested up against that. So really, most of these theories kind of do have a dead end because it
Mhm.
seems like, well, if we can't match them to a fingerprint, we can't really suggest that they're involved unless this is like a hit
Mhm.
kind of job, but no idea.
Do they know who the guys in the silver car were? Like, did they
No,
ever
they do not.
Okay, see, that's kind of interesting because I feel like so she was in the car with them, and then she got
Mhm.
out of the car,
So we think it's very
so we
possible.
think.
This two conflicting witness statements on that. One person says they saw her walking alone down Tremont Street, and another person says the last I saw of her, she was in the car wedged between these two guys.
Because the 2 guy thing also makes sense if they do take her away, they do something awful to her, and then decide to kill her. One guy, they hack her and then sorry, I shouldn't have said it like that. They, like, cut her in half, and then
Mhm.
one guy goes and gets rid of the one half, and the other guy takes the other half somewhere. Because that's the other thing, it's kinda like
Like maybe one was just really well hidden and the other was not.
Yeah,
Like both were intended to disappear forever.
yeah.
I'm just thinking of something now, and this is a really, really disgusting thought. But I kept fixating on I was like, well, the ignorance of like trying to cut off a lower half if you think she's pregnant or something, going off of the
Mhm.
Frank theory. It is very possible that if she was sexually assaulted, that somebody left their own DNA in her, and that also had to be removed
Yeah.
by just completely eliminating the lower half of her body, which is a really twisted thought, but it's just dawning on me now. That
Yeah.
could be like clear motive for having to dismember her in that way.
Yeah, because the dismemberment of the bottom half is just very odd to me if it's not somebody she knew. You know what I mean? Just
Mhm.
because of how
It seems shockingly
violent and
personal.
personal it is. Yeah, that but that makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Oh, that's so
It's so dark and ridiculous, honestly, but, like, it's either that or it's just it feels very, like, uh, what's the right word I'm trying to find? Like, woman hating, honestly, kind of like
mhm.
Alison Botha again, like, it feels
Right, to,
very
like, stab her directly in the womb.
yeah, 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 like, to do something like that feels like a hatred of a woman, honestly.
I wonder if there's any surgical knowledge to any of this because the incision made is so precise, so they say, and also this is a person who's careful and meticulous enough to know they're gonna wash her body. All of that to me suggests that this is somebody who does know kind of what they're doing. I mean, maybe we should just throw out the whole other opposing commentary from the pathologist who's like, "This is a first-time kill," because so much of this does seem very familiar with at least baseline forensic knowledge.
Mhm, and I also can't get over the strangulation first and then the dismemberment, but I guess dismemberment is, like, more yeah, I think I'm blowing it out of proportion in my mind that it's, like, not as common, like, I guess it actually does happen quite often, like, when people are trying to get rid of a body, like, thinking about, watching crime shows I've watched, like,
Well, it's very like
Sopranos or
it's
whatever,
it's
it's
very mafia-esque.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
it's very
about
common.
the part of her that was allowed to be found to identify her was not something that was going to incriminate anybody solely because all DNA had been washed off of her. The
Mhm,
only liability would have been the lower half of her body, and then it's so interesting because I'm assuming if she was, like, bagged up like this, she was done so while someone was wearing gloves, but at a certain point, they must have taken off one of those gloves for the partial fingerprint to be
yeah,
found, because
yeah.
nowhere else on that bag were any fingerprints found.
And when she was found, was it, like, literally she was in just one bag? Like, her
Yes.
whole
One thick green trash bag
that is
crumpled up,
such a scary image to
and
think
the
about.
homeless person who opened that bag said they tore it open, expecting to find something else in there, obviously, and he said what first came out was an arm, and then he looked down and through the mess of arms in the bag, he could see her face and her eyes.
I can't that's so scary to think about. Oh god,
Yeah.
my heart breaks for her because obviously she died horrifically, but, like, she was the if she had never come over here, never won that frickin' lottery, it just I hate that she came over here and that was her fate. It's terrible.
And under the guise of, like, her believing that it was, like, meant to be, that she was
Yeah,
supposed to be here because of that
yeah.
ticket and everything, and I can't even imagine the immense guilt. I mean, if truly the host family is not involved, but also her family back in Sweden and who were very active in this case, but of course, you can't hold on to the grief of this kind of monstrosity forever because it will kill
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
So they have, in large part, moved on from her story and try to remember her in the best light they can and not in
Yeah.
this way. But I think a lot about her friends who were out with her that
I
night and
was just
lost
gonna
her.
say that. Yeah. And I know that it comes up so many times in the cases we cover, but, like, I feel like it's such a cautionary tale every time. Like, when you go out to be first of all, nothing good happens after 2 a.m. or whatever, but, like,
Mhm.
to be so cognizant of, like, your surroundings when you are drinking that much and to not leave your friends. Like, it's just crazy how many times we see this happen with these cases.
It's kind of reminded me a little bit of the Riley Strain scenario
Yeah.
because Riley Strain was also extremely intoxicated and he was accidentally from his friends in that bar in Nashville because he was thrown out by a bouncer. And his friends were trying to get in contact with him through his phone, but they just couldn't reach him. This is a little bit different, but it is a similar circumstance in that sense that Karina is tossed out by a bouncer.
Mhm.
And then her friends don't know where she's at. They're also drunk. They're also with guys. They're thinking maybe she went home with a guy. A lot of different things were at play in order for this to happen in the way that it did, but I really don't know that we're ever gonna know who actually did it.
Yeah. Oh god, I hate this. I hate that that was her fate coming over here. Oh god. And I really hate that she was paired with a family that I just my personal feeling is that they really didn't care very much about, like, her
Mhm,
whereabouts and what she did. I feel like you kind of have a duty when you bring somebody into your home from another country as a host to, like,
mhm.
make sure they feel safe, make sure that you're checking in on them, that they can contact you. It just kinda seemed like they were not aware
I
or
mean, they
they were kind of
were
aloof.
immediately trying to safeguard themselves, not only from the accusations that they could be involved in her murder, but they were trying to safeguard themselves from working with that sketchy agency, which,
Mhm.
by the way, had a very grim history of being shut down something like 2 or 3 times even before it sourced Karina. So they
Yeah,
were not operating with a business license, like, they were truly like a back alley type agency.
and again
Trafficking. It's like
yeah,
literally trafficking.
yeah, and again, I think it tells you a lot about that family that they would do it because they clearly had the means to be able to go and, use a
And they would cut a
legitimate
corner and
agency.
try to do this, like, under the
Yeah,
table.
yeah, come on now.
But everything I've shared with you is what I know about Karina's story. Not one
Ugh,
that's very commonly discussed. Again, because,
yeah.
like, it's slim details when it comes to the aftermath, but it is one of the most shocking stories that I've read about from the '90s in Boston.
How did you find this? Was it a
It was a
creeper
suggestion,
suggestion?
yeah. It was from
Interesting.
was it Reasonable Bee?
Reasonable Bee. I'm curious where Reasonable Bee found this story or how it came
They have the
across
best
their desk.
suggestions. The creepers
Yeah,
really
they do
do
really do.
send us the
Yeah.
best cases.
So interesting. Well, that was really, really interesting. I hope that I mean, I know it's been a long time now, but my god, if they could ever find the other part of her remains, that would be
I'm trying to
incredible.
remember if they found even, like, a sliver of DNA evidence, because if there's one piece of DNA evidence that somehow someday gets linked back to somebody in the system, that could tell us the story.
Yeah. I'm curious how often actually just on like a bigger picture thing, like how often they go back and they rerun DNA against new criminals that come into the database, or I guess, like, it should just be, like, automatic now with our
I would hope
technology.
whoever built that system is like, if there's,
Yeah.
like, a hit that pops up, I would hope there's a
Yeah,
little, like, alert that comes
yeah,
up.
yeah, but I guess I wonder even back then, like, how often because 'cause I'm sure things could get missed before technology
Mhm.
became really, really robust, like, I wonder if they would miss things.
Well, that's the thing. I don't remember reading anywhere they even found any DNA, so I don't know
Yeah,
that there's anything to even test. All
mhm,
we've got is a fingerprint,
the
and if that
fingerprint.
person who did this stays out of prison for life, we will never know. We will never know who this was.
That's so creepy. Oh my god.
After dark.
After dark, baby.
Creepers, thank you so
Levity.
much. Thank you so, so much for listening to this case and going down this very convoluted rabbit hole of her story and the mystery of how she was found. I still feel like there's a large part of this, and I wish somebody would make a documentary on it. I feel
Yeah.
like there's a large part of the story that's still missing or absent.
I am sure we could cover or uncover a lot more about it if Frank and Susan weren't tight-lipped, if they'd
Same
because
with that
what do they
Boston
have to
police
hide?
officer.
Yeah.
Franken, they certainly had a liability in terms of how they sourced her, I'm sure,
Mhm.
so I think that
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
they were scared of being associated for, like, how they got her, but
Of
also
course.
that officer, there it is intentful that his name was concealed. That
Mhm.
was in part his decision that it wouldn't be released, and it was because they ruled him out, but I would be curious to learn more about his relationship with her
I
and just
know.
learn more about her.
I wanna know how they met.
Better question.
Yeah, because this is before, obviously, like, apps and everything like that. How did she come across this guy, especially when she was underaged at a bar? And he probably knew that she was 20.
If they met at a bar, they could have met on the street. It's
Yeah.
possible. There's a whole host of things that could have happened there, but
Yeah.
until then, this is what we have for the story.
Such an interesting case. That was really, really that's gonna stick with me. I'm gonna think about Karina.
Yeah. I don't think did you expect that it would take a turn like that as well? Because it was kinda set up like a disappearance case until it becomes very, very graphic.
Yeah, I didn't think it was gonna take kinda like the Riley Strain route. I thought that it was gonna be something like she got picked up by Frank and then, like,
Mhm.
something dreadful happened in the apartment or something is really where I thought it was going, but
Like more evidence, I guess, on the side of the family.
yeah, 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 and I do think the family knows a lot. Like, I would if someone does a documentary, whoever you're gonna be, make sure you find out what she was talking about in that damn note to her
Yeah,
friends.
and what the hell they were burning outside of their home.
Yes,
Would like to know
yes.
that very much.
Yeah. Oh my god.
But that's all I've got for you, baby.
Oh, baby, that was spectacular. That was really, really
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you to everybody who listened to this. We will have another episode for you next week. But for now, we're going to have to wrap this one up. We're going to say goodbye.
And good luck, babies.
We are going to catch you guys on the next one. We will see you on the road. This is
Oh
my
my
last episode before we're on tour. This is it.
You're like, "And then we fly
Bye.
off." Yeah, bye. See y'all. Hopefully, we come back for season 4.
Bye, guys.